I'm 66 years old now, and for 40 years I've been keeping the biggest secret imaginable. In the barn behind my house, hidden from the world, lives a creature that the government has been searching for since before I was born. His name is Samuel. At least, that's what I call him, and he's a Bigfoot. I found him when I was 26 years old, dying in the woods near my property in 1984, and I made a choice that day that changed both our lives forever. This is the story of how an ordinary man became the guardian of something extraordinary, and why I finally decided it's time to tell the truth. August 1984. The summer had been hot and dry in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon, where I'd lived since I was 18. I'd inherited the property from my uncle, 40 acres of forest land with a small house and a barn, remote enough that my nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. It was perfect for someone like me who preferred solitude and simplicity. My name is Henry Walsh, and back then I was just a quiet guy trying to make a living as a carpenter. I'd do jobs in the nearby town of Sisters, building decks and cabinets, fixing roofs. It was honest work, and it paid the bills. I lived alone, never married, content with my books, my workshop, and the peace of the forest. On August 14, 1984, I was working in my shop when I heard something that made me stop. It was a sound unlike anything I'd heard before, a low-pained vocalization that echoed through the trees. Not quite human, not quite animal, something in between. I grabbed my rifle. Bear country meant you always went into the woods armed, and headed toward the sound. I followed it for maybe a quarter mile deeper into the forest on my property until I found the source. At first, I thought it was a bear caught in a trap, but as I got closer, pushing through the underbrush, I realized it was something else entirely. It was lying on its side near a fallen tree, and it was massive, at least 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair matted with blood. The arms were too long, the shoulders too broad, and the face. God, the face was like nothing I'd ever seen, almost human, but not quite. Heavy brow, broad nose, eyes that were full of pain, and what looked like intelligence. A Bigfoot. A real, living Bigfoot, injured and dying on my property. My first instinct was to run. Every campfire story, every warning about creatures in the woods came flooding back. But then it looked at me, and I saw something in those eyes that stopped me cold. Not animal awareness, but understanding, recognition, fear. It was afraid of me. I lowered my rifle slowly. "Easy," I said, though I had no idea if it could understand me. "I'm not going to hurt you." I moved closer, keeping my movement slow and non-threatening. That's when I saw the injury. Its left leg was mangled, caught in what looked like the remnants of an old bear trap, the kind that had been illegal for years, but still littered these woods from decades past. The leg was badly infected, the trap's teeth buried deep in the flesh. The creature made that sound again, softer this time. It wasn't trying to threaten me, it was asking for help. I'd worked with injured animals before, deer, coyotes, even helped a bear cub once. But this was different. This was something that wasn't supposed to exist. Something that, if discovered, would bring scientists, government agents, hunters, and God knows who else to my property. But looking at that creature suffering in the trap, I couldn't just walk away. "Okay," I said, more to myself than to it. "Okay, let's see what we can do." I ran back to my house and grabbed my toolbox, medical supplies, and a bottle of whiskey, the only anesthetic I had. When I returned, the creature was still there, watching me approach with wary eyes. "This is going to hurt," I told it, unscrewing the whiskey bottle. "But if we don't get that trap off, infection's going to kill you." I poured whiskey over my hands and the trap mechanism, then started working to pry it open. The creature tensed, making sounds of pain, but it didn't try to attack me. It seemed to understand I was trying to help. It took me nearly an hour to work the trap open and free its leg. The damage was severe. Deep lacerations, possible fractures, infection spreading through the tissue. I cleaned the wounds as best I could, poured more whiskey over them as disinfectant. which caused the creature to let out a roar that probably scared every animal within a mile, and wrapped the leg with clean bandages. "You can't stay here," I said, sitting back on my heels, exhausted. "You need shelter, food, somewhere safe to heal. Can you walk?" The creature tried to stand, but immediately collapsed. Its leg couldn't support any weight. I looked around at the forest, then back at the creature. If I left it here, it would die. Other animals would find it, or it would succumb to infection. And if anyone else found it first, I made a decision that would define the next 40 years of my life. "My barn," I said. "It's not far. I can help you there, but you have to trust me." Over the next 3 hours, using a combination of encouraging words and physical support, I helped the creature make its way back to my property. It was agonizingly slow, and I had to practically carry it the last 100 yards. By the time we reached my barn, we were both exhausted. The barn was old but solid, with a hayloft and several stalls that hadn't housed animals in years. I'd been using it for storage, old furniture, tools, lumber. I cleared out the largest stall and helped the creature inside, piling hay to make a soft place for it to rest. "Stay here," I told it. "I'll bring food and water, and we need to keep you hidden. Nobody can know you're here. Do you understand?" The creature looked at me with those intelligent eyes and made a soft sound. Then, impossibly, it nodded. A clear, deliberate nod of understanding. "Good God," I whispered. "You really do understand." I spent the rest of that day and night tending to the creature. I brought water, which it drank gratefully. Food was trickier. I offered bread, which it refused, and then meat from my freezer, which it accepted. I changed its bandages, applied more antiseptic, and watched for signs of fever or worsening infection. The creature, I couldn't keep thinking of it as it, watched me work with what seemed like curiosity. When I brought my camping lantern so I could see better in the dim barn, it reached out and touched the glass gently, fascinated by the light. "You've never seen modern stuff before, have you?" I said. "You've been living out there in the wild all your life, avoiding people, staying hidden." It made a sound that might have been agreement. Over the next few days, as I continued treating the injury, something remarkable happened. We began to communicate, not with words. The creature's vocal anatomy couldn't produce human speech, I realized, but with gestures, sounds, and expressions. It learned to nod for yes and shake its head for no. It would point at things it needed or wanted. And it began making different vocalizations that I gradually learned to interpret, one sound for pain, another for hunger, another for gratitude. By the end of the first week, the infection was receding and the leg was starting to heal. The creature could put a little weight on it, though it would be weeks before it could walk properly. And by then, I'd made another decision. Even after it healed, I couldn't let it go back into the wild. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because on August 18th, just 4 days after I'd found it, federal agents had shown up at my neighbor's property 3 miles away. They were asking about unusual animal sightings, large tracks, strange sounds in the woods. Someone had reported something, and the government was investigating. I'd heard about this before. Whispered stories about government agents searching for Bigfoot, rumors of creatures being captured and taken to secret facilities. I didn't know if the stories were true, but I couldn't risk finding out. So the creature stayed in my barn. And as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, something unexpected happened. We became friends. I named it Samuel, after my late uncle who'd left me the property. Samuel seemed to accept the name, responding when I said it. He was male. I'd confirmed that while treating his injuries, probably in his 20s, based on my best guess at age indicators. Samuel was incredibly intelligent. Within a month, he'd learned dozens of gestures we could use to communicate. He understood that he needed to stay hidden, and he never made loud sounds during the day when someone might hear. He learned my daily routine and would wait patiently for me to bring food and water, but he was also lonely. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in the soft sounds he'd make at night when he thought I couldn't hear. He missed his kind, missed the forest, missed his freedom. "I'm sorry," I told him one evening as summer turned to fall. "I know this isn't fair, but if they find you, they'll take you away, lock you up, study you, maybe worse. At least here, you're safe." Samuel looked at me with those sad, intelligent eyes. Then he placed one massive hand on my shoulder, gently, carefully, aware of his own strength, a gesture that said, "I understand. Thank you for protecting me." That was September 1984. Ronald Reagan was president, MTV was playing music videos around the clock, and the world had no idea that in a small barn in Oregon, a man and a Bigfoot were forming an unlikely friendship that would last 4 decades. By October, Samuel's leg had healed enough that he could walk again, though with a slight limp that would never fully go away. He could have left. The barn door was never locked, but he stayed, maybe because he felt safe, maybe because he'd been alone too and had found companionship, or maybe because he understood what I was offering, protection from a world that would never accept what he was. Whatever the reason, Samuel stayed. And I kept his secret day after day, month after month, year after year. Living with Samuel required completely restructuring my life. The barn became his permanent home, and I spent months making it more comfortable for him. I insulated the walls for winter, installed a wood stove for heat, and created a space where he could move around freely without being visible from outside. The biggest challenge was food. Samuel was large, probably around 600 pounds, and needed a lot to eat. His natural diet was omnivorous: meat, fish, berries, roots, nuts. I couldn't just buy enough groceries for 2 without raising suspicions, so I had to be creative. I started hunting more, telling people in town I was selling deer meat to cover my increased ammunition purchases. I planted a massive vegetable garden, explaining it away as a new hobby. I drove to different towns to buy groceries, so no single store would notice how much I was purchasing. Every trip required careful planning to avoid drawing attention. Samuel adapted to his new life remarkably well. He was naturally nocturnal, which helped. He'd sleep during the day when I was working and be active at night when there was no risk of being seen. I'd spend my evenings in the barn with him, and we developed routines that felt almost domestic. He was fascinated by human things. I brought him books, and while he couldn't read, he'd study the pictures for hours. I had an old radio in the barn, and he loved listening to music, classical especially, which seemed to calm him. When MTV started playing music videos, I brought in a small TV with a VCR, and Samuel would watch for hours, utterly captivated by the moving images. "You're probably the only Bigfoot in the world who's seen Michael Jackson's Thriller video," I told him one night in 1985, watching him watch the TV with wonder in his eyes. He made a sound that I'd learned meant amusement. If he could have laughed, he would have. But there were close calls, especially in those first years. In March 1985, a severe storm damaged my barn's roof. I had to hire a contractor to fix it, which meant Samuel had to hide in the hayloft under blankets and tarps for 3 days while workers were on the property. I stayed with him the whole time, terrified one of them would hear him breathing or moving. "Just a little longer," I whispered to him as hammers pounded overhead. "Stay quiet. Stay still." Samuel remained perfectly motionless for hours at a time. His self-control was extraordinary. When the workers finally left and I removed the coverings, he was stiff and uncomfortable, but had made no sound that would have betrayed his presence. In July 1986, a forest fire came within 2 miles of my property. Evacuation orders were issued, and police came door to door to make sure everyone left. I told them I'd evacuated, then snuck back to stay with Samuel. "I'm not leaving you," I said as smoke filled the air and ash fell like snow. "If this place burns, we burn together." Samuel looked at me with what I can only describe as gratitude mixed with concern. He placed his hand over his chest, then pointed at me, then at the forest. He was telling me to save myself, that I didn't have to stay. "Yeah, I do," I replied. "You're my responsibility now, my friend." Friends don't abandon each other. The fire changed direction that night, sparing my property by less than a mile. When the evacuation order lifted and I returned home, I told everyone I'd been staying with friends in Bend. No one questioned it. The years passed, and Samuel and I fell into a rhythm. I learned more about him than probably any human had ever learned about his kind. He was incredibly strong. I once saw him lift a 300-pound beam of wood with one hand. He was agile despite his size, able to climb to the top of the barn in seconds using the support beams. His senses were far superior to mine. He could hear my truck coming from a mile away. He could smell when someone was approaching the property long before I could see them. His night vision was perfect. He could navigate the barn in complete darkness with no difficulty. But most impressively, he was emotionally complex. He experienced joy, sadness, loneliness, fear, and affection. He had a sense of humor. He'd sometimes hide my tools as a joke, then make that amused sound when I couldn't find them. He could be playful, gentle, thoughtful. In 1987, I made a major modification to the property. I told people in town I was building a large storage shed, but actually, I was creating a tunnel system connecting the barn to a section of fenced forest area where Samuel could go outside safely at night. 20 feet of underground tunnel reinforced with timber and concrete, opening into a quarter-acre enclosure surrounded by 12-foot-tall fencing camouflaged to look like natural forest. It took me 6 months working every evening, but when it was finished, Samuel had access to open air and real trees for the first time in 3 years. The first night he went outside, he stood under the stars for an hour, just looking up at the sky. I stood watching him from the tunnel entrance, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I know it's not the same as real freedom," I said quietly, "but it's something." He made a soft sound and placed his hand on his chest, over his heart. "Thank you." By 1989, we developed an even more sophisticated communication system. I'd made flashcards with simple pictures and words, teaching him to associate images with meanings. He learned to point at cards to communicate more complex ideas. He learned numbers, could understand time, showing him clock faces to explain when I'd be back, and even grasped basic concepts like days of the week. "You're smarter than most people I know," I told him one evening, as he correctly identified a sequence of cards. "If the world knew what you really are, what you're capable of." But that was exactly why the world couldn't know. The close calls continued through the years. In 1991, a hiker got lost and wandered onto my property. I found him near the barn, exhausted and dehydrated. I gave him water and directions back to the main trail, all while Samuel remained absolutely silent inside, just 20 feet away from the stranger. In 1993, property values in the area started rising and developers began buying land. A real estate agent visited, asking if I'd be interested in selling. She walked around the property, getting far too close to the barn for my comfort. "That's a nice barn," she said. "Good bones. A buyer could convert it into a guest house or studio." "Not for sale," I said firmly. "This property stays in the family." "Everything's for sale at the right price, Mr. Walsh. Not this, not ever." She left disappointed, but she came back twice more over the following months with increasingly generous offers. Each time, I refused. Samuel was more important than any amount of money. As the 1990s progressed, I began to worry about the future. I was in my late 30s, healthy and strong, but I wouldn't be forever. What would happen to Samuel when I got old? When I died? He'd been living in that barn for nearly a decade by then. He'd lost his survival skills for the wild. He depended on me completely. I started setting aside money, making plans. I bought the surrounding properties as they came up for sale. another 40 acres in 1994, 60 more in 1996. By 1998, I owned 140 acres of forest, creating a larger buffer zone between Samuel and the outside world. I also documented everything in journals: how to care for Samuel, his dietary needs, his health issues. He'd developed arthritis in the leg that had been trapped, his preferences, his routines. If something happened to me, whoever found these journals would at least know how to take care of him. Samuel seemed to sense my concerns. One evening in 1999, 15 years after I'd found him, he did something remarkable. Using the picture cards, he created a sequence: a picture of me, a picture of him, a picture of a house, and a picture of a heart. You and me, home, love, I interpreted. This is our home. We're family. He nodded emphatically, then pointed at me and made a gesture I'd come to recognize, his hand over his heart, then extended toward me. His way of saying he was grateful, that he cared for me. "Yeah, buddy," I said, my voice thick. "We're family. You're stuck with me for the long haul." As the year 2000 approached and the world worried about Y2K, I worried about different things. Samuel was middle-aged now, probably around 40 years old by my estimates. I was 42. We'd spent nearly half our lives together, hidden from the world, creating our own small universe in that barn and the forest around it. I'd sacrificed normal life for this. No wife, no kids, no close friendships. Maintaining Samuel's secret meant keeping everyone at arm's length. My existence revolved around protecting him, providing for him, keeping him safe and hidden. But watching him that New Year's Eve, sitting peacefully in the barn, listening to classical music on the radio as the year 2000 arrived, I knew I'd made the right choice. The world might see him as a monster or a curiosity, but I saw him as what he really was, a person. Different from me, certainly, but a thinking, feeling person who deserved dignity, safety, and kindness. And I'd keep protecting him, no matter what it cost me, for as long as I lived. The 2000s brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. Technology was advancing rapidly, and with it came new threats to Samuel's secrecy. Satellite imagery became more detailed and accessible. Google Earth launched in 2005, and suddenly anyone with internet could view aerial photos of properties, including mine. I became paranoid about what might be visible from above. I built additional roof structures over the outdoor enclosure, making it look like natural tree canopy. I planted fast-growing trees strategically to block sightlines. I even researched thermal imaging technology, worried that someone might detect Samuel's heat signature. "The world's getting smaller," I told Samuel one evening in 2006. "Harder to keep secrets. Everyone's got cameras now, internet, GPS. We have to be more careful than ever." Samuel, now in his 60s by my estimation, nodded slowly. He understood. His hair had started graying around the face and shoulders, and his movements were stiffer than they'd been 20 years ago. The arthritis in his leg bothered him more, especially in cold weather. I was 48 then, and I'd started feeling my age too. Years of carpentry work had taken their toll on my back and knees. I worried about what would happen when I couldn't physically care for Samuel anymore, when climbing ladders to repair the barn became too risky, when carrying heavy loads of food became impossible. In 2007, I made a decision that scared me but felt necessary. I needed help, but not from strangers. I reached out to my nephew, David Walsh, who was 23 and working as a park ranger in Washington. David had always been a good kid, responsible, trustworthy, someone who respected nature and privacy. More importantly, he was family. If anyone could keep this secret, it would be him. I invited him to visit for a week in August 2007. On his third day there, after we'd spent time reconnecting and I'd evaluated his character once more, I decided to take the risk. "David, I need to show you something," I said. "What you're about to see, you can never tell anyone. Not your parents, not your girlfriend, not your ranger colleagues. If you can't promise that absolutely, we stop right here." David looked concerned but intrigued. "Uncle Henry, are you in trouble? Is this illegal?" "It's not illegal exactly. But if anyone found out, they'd take away something very important to me. Someone very important." "Someone?" I led him to the barn. Samuel was in the outdoor enclosure, which I could access through the tunnel. I'd told Samuel that morning that someone new was coming, someone I trusted, and he needed to be calm and not afraid. When David saw Samuel standing under the trees, he literally fell backwards, scrambling away in shock. "What the hell? That's a Bigfoot." "His name is Samuel," I said calmly, "and he's been living here since 1984. 23 years, David. I found him dying in a trap, and I've been protecting him ever since." David couldn't form words. He just stared, mouth open, as Samuel watched him with cautious eyes. "He's intelligent, David, as smart as you or me, maybe smarter in some ways. He understands English, communicates through gestures and pictures. He's gentle, kind, and he's my best friend. He's also terrified right now because there's a stranger here, so I need you to calm down." It took David an hour to process what he was seeing. He asked 100 questions, which I answered patiently. Finally, he looked at me with something like awe. "Uncle Henry, do you understand what this means? This is the most important zoological discovery in history. Scientists would lock him up, study him like a lab animal, make him famous, take away every bit of dignity and freedom he has left." I interrupted. "I know what scientists would do, David. That's why no one can ever know." "But there's no but. Samuel is a person, not a specimen. He has rights, even if the law doesn't recognize them. He has feelings, preferences, fears. He deserves to live in peace, not in a zoo or a research facility." David spent the rest of that week getting to know Samuel. By the end, he understood why I'd kept the secret. He promised to help, to be there if something happened to me, to take over Samuel's care if necessary. "Thank you," I told him as he left. "You've just made yourself responsible for the biggest secret in the world. I won't let you down, Uncle Henry, or Samuel." Having David know was both a relief and a new anxiety, but as the years passed and he kept his word, never telling anyone, visiting regularly to help with heavier work, I knew I'd made the right choice. In 2008, I turned 50, and Samuel was probably around 65. We were both slowing down, but our routines remained stable. Samuel had his outdoor time each night, his meals, his music, and television. I'd upgraded to a DVD player, and Samuel had developed favorite movies. He particularly loved nature documentaries. I think he missed the wild world he'd once known. But that year brought an unexpected crisis. In October 2008, during a routine visit, David noticed Samuel was moving strangely. "Uncle Henry, something's wrong. Look at how he's breathing." Samuel was wheezing, struggling to catch his breath. His color was off, and he seemed disoriented. I'd seen him sick before, colds, minor infections, but this was different. "I think it's his heart," I said, panic rising. "Or pneumonia, maybe. David, what do? I can't take him to a vet. I can't take him to a doctor." "Do you have a stethoscope? First aid training?" "Basic stuff, but nothing for something serious." David made a decision. "I know someone. A veterinarian friend who works with large animals. She's discreet, doesn't ask questions. Let me call her." "David, no. Uncle Henry, if we don't do something, Samuel could die. Trust me on this." Dr. Lisa Chen arrived the next morning, believing she was coming to treat a large exotic animal that a ranger friend's uncle kept illegally. David had been deliberately vague. When she saw Samuel, she went silent for a full minute. "That's not possible," she finally whispered. "It's possible, and it's real, and he's dying," I said. "Can you help him?" Lisa, to her credit, pulled herself together quickly. She examined Samuel, who was too sick to be frightened of yet another stranger. Her diagnosis was pneumonia, severe but treatable if we acted quickly. "He needs antibiotics, respiratory support, and monitoring. I can do this. But..." She looked at me and David. This is real. You're hiding a living Bigfoot. For 24 years, yes, I said. And if you tell anyone, they'll take him away from me. Please. Lisa thought for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll help. But you two owe me every detail about how this happened. She treated Samuel for 2 weeks, visiting daily, bringing medications and equipment. Samuel's fever broke on day 5, and by day 10, he was breathing normally again. Lisa refused payment, saying the experience was compensation enough. He's remarkable, she told me. Physiologically similar to great apes, but with unique adaptations. His lung capacity is extraordinary, probably why he survived pneumonia that would have killed a human. And Henry? He trusts you completely. The bond you two have is something I've never seen between human and animal. He's not an animal, I corrected gently. He's a person, different but a person. Lisa nodded slowly. Yes, I can see that now. She became part of our small circle of trust. 3 people in the world who knew about Samuel, and all 3 of us committed to protecting him. The 2010s brought more changes. I turned 60 in 2018, officially a senior citizen, though I felt older. My back was bad, my knees were worse, and I'd had a minor heart attack in 2015 that scared me badly. Samuel was in his 70s now, moving slowly, sleeping more, eating less. We were both getting old, and I was increasingly aware that our time together was finite. David visited more frequently, bringing his wife Emily into the secret in 2016 when they got married. Emily, a biologist, was overwhelmed but adapted quickly. She helped Lisa monitor Samuel's health, documenting everything scientifically. Uncle Henry, you've kept detailed records for over 30 years, Emily said, reading through my journals. This is invaluable data about an unknown species. Even if Samuel is the last of his kind, this information could... No publication, I said firmly. Not while he's alive, not while it could lead people here. After we're both gone, you can decide what to do with it, but not before. I understand, she said. But Henry, what if he's not the last? What if there are others out there who could benefit from what you've learned about his care, his needs? It was a question I'd asked myself 1,000 times. Were there others like Samuel, hiding in the deep wilderness, struggling to survive? If there were, could my knowledge help them? But the risk was too great. Revealing what I knew meant revealing Samuel's existence. And I'd promised him 40 years ago that I'd keep him safe. In 2019, Samuel's health started declining more noticeably. He was eating less, moving with difficulty, spending most of his time sleeping. Lisa examined him and confirmed what I'd feared. He's dying, Henry. Not immediately, but his systems are shutting down gradually. Old age. He might have a few more years, but he's in the final stage of life. I sat with Samuel that evening, my hand on his massive shoulder, both of us old and tired, and facing the end. You've had a good life, I told him. Safe, comfortable, loved. That's more than a lot of humans get. I hope you don't regret staying here with me all these years. Samuel placed his hand over mine, then pointed at me, at himself, at the heart symbol he'd drawn on cards decades ago. No regrets. Family, love. Yeah, I said, tears in my eyes. Me too, buddy, me too. Samuel lived longer than Lisa predicted. Throughout 2020 and into 2021, while the world dealt with the COVID pandemic, Samuel and I dealt with our own quiet crisis of aging and mortality. The isolation that everyone else suddenly experienced was nothing new to us. We'd been isolated together for 36 years by then. The pandemic actually helped us in one way. With people staying home and fewer visitors to the area, there was less risk of discovery. David and Emily moved into the old house on one of my other properties, ostensibly to help me during lockdown, but really to provide daily assistance with Samuel's care. Samuel's world had shrunk to just the barn now. He no longer had the strength to navigate the tunnel to the outdoor enclosure. His arthritis was severe, and he spent most of his time on a specially built bed we'd constructed, essentially a large platform with thick padding that could support his weight while keeping him comfortable. But his mind remained sharp. He still enjoyed his music, still watched nature documentaries on the TV we'd mounted where he could see it easily. He still communicated with us through gestures and his picture cards, though his movements were slower, more deliberate. In June 2021, I turned 63. Samuel was probably around 78 or 79. We'd been together for 37 years, more than half my life, and over half of his. "Do you remember when we met?" I asked him one evening, sitting beside his bed. "You were trapped, dying, and I was just a guy who couldn't leave an injured creature to suffer. I never planned for any of this, never imagined we'd spend 4 decades together." Samuel made a soft sound and pointed at a card showing 2 figures side by side. Then he pointed at me, at himself, and placed his hand over his heart. "Brothers," I said, understanding. "Yeah, we became brothers, didn't we?" He nodded slowly, his eyes, still intelligent despite his body's decline, filled with what I can only describe as love. In September 2021, Samuel stopped eating regularly. Lisa examined him and found nothing acutely wrong, just the general system's failure of extreme old age. She increased his pain medication and made him as comfortable as possible. "It could be days or weeks," she told me privately. "But Henry, you need to prepare yourself. And you need to think about what happens after." After? I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. His body, we can't just bury him in the forest like a pet. He's important, Henry. What he represents, what you've documented about him, the scientific community, the world, should know he existed. I promised him secrecy. You promised him protection while he was alive. After he's gone, Lisa paused. That promise changes. I didn't want to think about it, but she was right. Samuel's death would raise questions I'd been avoiding for years. What would we do with his remains? How could we honor his life while respecting the secret we'd kept? David had a different perspective. "Uncle Henry, you've hidden Samuel for almost 40 years. That's an incredible act of love and protection. But when he's gone, don't you think the world deserves to know that these creatures existed, that one of them trusted a human enough to spend his whole life with him?" "The government will come," I said. "They'll take him, take my journals, classify everything. His memory will disappear into some vault." "Not if we control the narrative," Emily suggested. "What if we documented everything first? Photographs, videos, DNA samples. What if we went public immediately after he passes, so widely and publicly that the government can't suppress it?" "That's dangerous," Lisa warned. "Henry could face legal consequences. Harboring an endangered species without permits, if they decide to classify it that way, he could lose everything." "I'm 63 years old," I said. "I've lived my life. If telling Samuel's story costs me my freedom or my property, maybe that's a price worth paying. He deserves to be remembered as more than a myth." We spent the fall of 2021 preparing. Emily took hundreds of photographs of Samuel, documenting his physical characteristics, his living space, his picture cards, everything. David recorded videos of Samuel communicating, responding to questions, showing his intelligence and personality. Lisa collected blood and hair samples for DNA analysis at a private lab she trusted. I organized my journals, 37 years of daily notes about Samuel's life, behavior, diet, health, emotions. It was the most complete documentation of a Bigfoot's existence ever compiled. Samuel seemed to understand what we were doing. He cooperated with the photographs and videos, even appeared to pose occasionally. On good days, he'd demonstrate his communication skills, pointing at picture cards to answer David's questions. "Why do you think he's okay with this?" David asked me. "If he's lived in hiding all these years, why allow us to document everything now?" "Because he knows he's dying," I said. "And maybe, on some level, He wants to be remembered, wants his kind to be known, even if he's the only one we've ever confirmed. On December 3, 2021, Samuel's condition deteriorated rapidly. We all gathered in the barn, me, David, Emily, and Lisa. Samuel was struggling to breathe, clearly in pain despite the medication. "Is he suffering?" I asked Lisa. "Yes. His lungs are failing. It won't be much longer." I sat beside Samuel's bed, holding his massive hand in both of mine. "It's okay, buddy. You can let go. You've fought long enough. You've lived a good life, been loved, been safe. That's all anyone can ask for." Samuel's eyes focused on me. He squeezed my hand weakly, then did something he'd never done before. He vocalized words, or something close to words. His vocal anatomy couldn't produce human speech perfectly, but I could make out the sounds. Hen, rye, thank, you. 37 years of communication through gestures and pictures, and in his final moments, he found a way to say my name. "You're welcome," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for 40 years of companionship. I love you, Samuel." He made one last soft sound, squeezed my hand once more, and then his breathing stopped. The barn fell silent except for my sobs and Emily's quiet crying. Samuel was gone. We sat with him for hours, none of us ready to leave. Finally, as dawn broke on December 4th, 2021, we began the process we'd planned. Lisa performed a complete examination and collected tissue samples for preservation. Emily and David took final photographs and measurements. I wrote the final entry in my journal. December 4th, 2021. Samuel passed away peacefully at approximately 3:47 a.m. with his family present. He was approximately 78-79 years old and had lived with me for 37 years, 3 months and 20 days. The world has lost something irreplaceable. We preserved his body in a refrigerated storage unit we'd prepared, keeping it at a constant temperature while we made our next moves. According to our plan, we'd go public in stages. First, David and Emily published their documentation online, photographs, videos, and scientific analysis through multiple channels simultaneously to prevent suppression. They sent packages to major news outlets, scientific journals, and cryptozoology organizations. Second, Lisa submitted her DNA analysis to a peer-reviewed genetics journal under her name, detailing the samples from an unidentified North American hominid without revealing the full story yet. Third, I prepared to give an interview to a major news network, telling the complete story of Samuel's life and my 40 years protecting him. We launched everything on December 15th, 2021, exactly 11 days after Samuel's death. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Within hours, my property was surrounded by news vans, reporters, government vehicles, and curiosity seekers. My phone rang constantly until I unplugged it. The internet exploded with debate. Was this real? An elaborate hoax? The discovery of the century? Federal agents arrived on December 16th, demanding access to Samuel's remains and all documentation. I let them in, showing them everything. The senior agent, a woman named Sarah Thornton, examined Samuel's body for a long time before speaking. "Mr. Walsh, do you understand the legal complications of what you've done? Harboring an unknown species, preventing scientific study, withholding information from federal authorities." "I understand I protected a living, intelligent being from being captured and experimented on," I interrupted. "I gave him a life of dignity and safety. If that's illegal, then charge me." Thornton looked at me for a long moment. "Mr. Walsh, there have been rumors of these creatures for decades. Reports, sightings, alleged government knowledge. What you've done here is provide undeniable proof. This body, your documentation, the DNA evidence, it's all real. And it's going to change everything." "Good," I said. "It should. Samuel deserves to be known. His species deserves recognition, protection." If there are others out there, maybe now we can protect them instead of hiding them. You may have just triggered the biggest cryptozoological and anthropological crisis in history, Thornton said. I hope you're ready for the consequences. I've had 40 years to prepare, I replied. I'm ready. The months following our revelation were chaos. My property became a permanent camp for media, scientists, government officials, and protesters, arguing about what should happen to Samuel's remains. I gave dozens of interviews, showing my journals, the barn where he'd lived, the communication system we'd developed over 40 years. The DNA analysis confirmed what we'd documented. Samuel was indeed a previously unidentified hominid species, genetically positioned between modern humans and extinct archaic humans like Neanderthals. The scientific community was split between those amazed by the discovery and those skeptical it could have remained hidden so long. In January 2022, the federal government officially classified Samuel's species as critically endangered, possibly extinct, and established a task force to investigate whether other populations existed. They offered me immunity from prosecution in exchange for full cooperation and consultation on any conservation efforts. They want you to help them find more, David said as we read through the legal documents. After 40 years of hiding Samuel, they want you to help search for his kind. If there are others out there, I said, they deserve protection, real protection, not just monitoring and secrecy. Samuel lived in hiding because he was terrified of humans. Maybe we can create a world where his kind don't have to live in fear. But the government had a different revelation for me. In February 2022, Agent Thornton returned with classified documents. Mr. Walsh, what I'm about to tell you has been kept secret for decades. The government has been aware of Bigfoot populations since the 1960s. We've been monitoring them, protecting their habitats covertly, and maintaining strict information control to prevent exactly the kind of chaos your revelation has caused. I stared at her. You've known? All this time while I was hiding Samuel, terrified you'd find him and take him away? You already knew these creatures existed? We knew they existed in the wild. We had no idea someone had one living on their property for 40 years. Mr. Walsh, the reason we suppressed information wasn't to deny their existence, but to protect them from hunters, trophy seekers, and overzealous scientists. Your revelation has put every remaining population at risk. Then protect them publicly, I said. Make their habitat legally protected. Enforce penalties for harming them. Stop pretending they don't exist and actually do something. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. You've been hiding the truth to make your jobs easier, not to protect these creatures. Samuel lived for 40 years in a barn because he was too terrified to be free. That's not protection. That's just a different kind of prison. The debate raged through 2022 and into 2023. Environmental groups pushed for official Endangered Species Act protection. Hunters' organizations argued about whether Bigfoot should be legal game if it was just an animal. Ethicists debated whether a human-like species should have legal personhood. Samuel's body remained in federal custody, being studied by multiple research teams. They confirmed everything I'd documented: his intelligence, his physical adaptations, his capacity for emotion and communication. Some scientists proposed he be displayed in the Smithsonian, a monument to an unknown species. Others argued his remains should be returned to the wild, buried in the forest he'd been taken from 40 years earlier. I fought for the latter. Samuel lived his entire adult life in hiding to avoid being a spectacle. You will not make him one in death. In August 2023, a compromise was reached. Samuel's remains would be cremated and his ashes scattered in the Cascade Mountains near where I'd found him. A small portion of tissue samples would be preserved for future genetic research. My journals and documentation would be archived at the Smithsonian, available to researchers but not sensationalized for public display. The ceremony was held on September 1st, 2023, exactly 39 years and 18 days After I'd found Samuel trapped in that clearing, David, Emily, Lisa, and I, along with a small group of scientists and government officials who'd worked on the case, hiked to the location. I carried Samuel's ashes in a simple wooden box I'd made in my workshop, one last carpentry project for my old friend. When we reached the spot, I opened the box and scattered the ashes among the trees where he'd once lived free. Samuel was more than a scientific specimen, I said to the gathered witnesses. He was a person. He had preferences, emotions, memories. He loved classical music and nature documentaries. He had a sense of humor. He grieved, he laughed, he felt fear and joy and affection. For 40 years, he was my family, and I was his. He trusted me when he had no reason to trust any human. He stayed when he could have left. He gave me companionship and purpose, and in return, I gave him safety and dignity. That's what I want people to remember, not just that Bigfoot is real, but that they're worthy of our respect, our protection, and our compassion. I scattered the last of the ashes. Rest easy, buddy. You're home now? The aftermath of Samuel's revelation continued to unfold through 2023 and into 2024. Several credible sightings were reported and investigated, though no other individuals were captured or confirmed. Habitat protection laws were passed in several states, creating large wilderness preserves where the creatures might exist undisturbed. In March 2024, I turned 66. Samuel had been gone for 2 years and 3 months. The barn where he'd lived still stood, but it was empty now. I'd removed everything: the bed we'd built, the TV and DVD player, the picture cards we'd used to communicate. All of it was archived, documented, preserved as evidence of a 40-year experiment in interspecies friendship. I gave my final major interview in April 2024, sitting on the porch of my house, looking out at the forest that had been Samuel's prison and sanctuary. "Do you regret it?" the reporter asked. 40 years of your life devoted to hiding and protecting Samuel. You never married, never had children, never lived a normal life. Do you regret that choice? I thought about it for a long moment. I regret that he needed to be hidden at all. I regret that the world wasn't safe for him to live freely. I regret that he spent his entire adult life in a barn instead of in these forests where he belonged. But do I regret knowing him, protecting him, loving him? Never. Not for a second. What do you hope Samuel's legacy will be? I hope people understand that there's more to this world than we think we know, that there are mysteries still hiding in the wild places, and they deserve our protection, not our exploitation. And I hope that if there are others like Samuel out there, they're treated with the respect and dignity he deserved, but only found with me. What would you say to Samuel if you could speak to him one more time? I looked out at the forest, at the mountains beyond, at the sky where I liked to imagine Samuel might be, finally free. I'd say thank you. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for 40 years of companionship. Thank you for teaching me that intelligence and emotion aren't unique to humans, that family can take forms we never expect, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is protect someone who can't protect themselves. And I'd tell him I'm sorry. Sorry it took me so long to tell his story. Sorry the world wasn't ready for him. Sorry he had to live his life in hiding. But mostly I'd tell him what I told him every night for 40 years, that he was loved, that he mattered, and that his life had meaning beyond what anyone else would understand. The reporter turned off her recorder. That's beautiful, Mr. Walsh. Thank you. After she left, I sat on that porch until sunset, just like I used to do before I'd go out to the barn to spend the evening with Samuel. The routine was so ingrained that I still felt the pull, still had the urge to walk out there and check on him. But the barn was empty. Samuel was gone. The secret was revealed. And I was just an old man living alone in the woods, with nothing left but memories and the knowledge that I'd done something extraordinary, even if the world hadn't known it for 40 years. David and Emily visit regularly. Lisa stops by to check on me. They worry I'm lonely, that I'm lost without Samuel. Maybe I am. 40 years is a long time to dedicate to one purpose, one friendship. What do you do when that's gone? But I have the journals, I have the photographs, I have 40 years of memories of a friendship that shouldn't have been possible, but was. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that Samuel's story is out there now, that his existence mattered, that he'll be remembered not as a myth, but as a real thinking, feeling person who deserved better than what the world would have given him. In my bedroom, I keep one thing, Samuel's favorite picture card. It shows two stick figures side by side with a heart between them. Family, love, brotherhood. That's what we were. That's what we'll always be, even though he's gone. I'm 66 years old. I hid a living Bigfoot from the government for 40 years. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Because some friendships are worth any sacrifice. Some secrets are kept not out of shame, but out of love. And sometimes the most remarkable thing an ordinary person can do is recognize that something extraordinary deserves protection, dignity, and respect. That was Samuel's gift to me. The privilege of protecting him, of knowing him, of being his friend. And that's a gift I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.